Relationals, how are we doing today? Sterling here with Psychologic Anarchist. Today we're going to talk more about relationalism, what this philosophy means, and sort of the path that it is going to take us, where the road that we're headed down. So in the last installation of this series, I discussed my background and how my background influenced my ideas and how it brought me to this point of where I could start communicating compassionate anarchism, relational anarchism, relationalism, whatever terminology you want to use to describe essentially the same force or the same wave in anarchistic doctrine. So the important thing about me talking about my past in the last episode was it gave you the idea of how I developed a hard mentality at first. And what I mean when I say hard mentality is that I was more trained on the logical vectors of anarchism, the logical, economic, and moral vectors of anarchism. And because of this training in the what I refer to as the cognitive realm of anarchistic philosophy, it really amplified my bitterness. The fact that I was angry about my past, about my childhood, about the fact that I had gotten kidnapped and caged for possessing a smorgasbord of pills and powders, etc. So just now, over the last year, I started to analyze my predicament. I started to analyze my thought process, and I also started to critique modern anarchism, modern voluntarism. And when I say modern anarchism, I'm really referring to the voluntarist and anarcho-capitalist strains, because I believe that is the more important force for freedom that currently exists in our world. I think that we all realize and have an understanding that anarcho-communism and various forms of Marxism have been utterly debunked, and I don't think that a lot of people really follow those paths, or not quite as many. And I really see most of the innovation occurring in anarcho-capitalist and voluntarist spheres. So that's just my ideas on that area. So the first concept that I created as part of this path toward relational anarchism within the critique is this idea that there's anarchist types. And within anarchist types, there's generally two types that I put on a continuum. It's hard anarchists and soft anarchists. Hard anarchists are the ones who are focused more on the logical, economic, and moral facets of the philosophy. The soft anarchists are the ones who are more focused on the emotional, the spiritual, the psychospiritual, the psychedelic areas of anarchism. Now, I'm not saying that these are, or what I'm suggesting is a hard and fast rule, because it's not. There's obviously a lot of overlap, and I think there should be some overlap, because that's what gives our philosophy balance as a form of expression and self-expression. So in this first article, I also, or what I titled Anarchy and Emotion Toward a Softer Aesthetic for Freedom, I put the hard and soft anarchistic ideas on a continuum or a scale. And all I'm suggesting is that we dial down from the harder end of the spectrum down to the softer end in order to create more balance in our communities, and for us to better communicate these ideas to people, to get more people involved in anarchism through these channels of more compassion, more open communication, more love, and more decency. So when I was doing the critique and looking at what encompasses the hard anarchist element, I really needed to look at the evidence for this. Well, Sterling, what evidence that you have that anarchists are embittered, or that they're more focused on logical, economic, and moral facets? Well, the first thing is most of the literature, voluntarist and anarcho-capitalist, is obviously honed in or channels in on the logical, the moral, and the economic trajectories, as I've already mentioned. And here's the thing: most of the literature that we've read as we came into this philosophy was Murray Rothbard's books. For instance, For New Liberty, as I mentioned in the last video, is what really influenced me. And that's all that he discusses, is these harder vectors of anarchism. Mises, a purely economic standpoint, the Austrian school of thought. You have Molyneux's material, and we'll discuss a little bit more about Molyneux in a minute, but his material, even on Free Domain Radio, his main idea or tagline is this notion of very clear thinking, right? So it's totally cognitive, totally intellectualized, totally in your head type of material. And then Larkin Rose, of course, the most dangerous superstition is the notion of authority. So it's this idea we have to debunk authority at every turn light. So it's more cognitive errors, it's more direct attacks on the thinking patterns involved in statism. And so that's again one of the things we're really trying to move away from here in the anarchistic compassionate communities. And this is where we've been. This is where anarchism has currently come from. Voluntarism has come from. The womb, if you will, of anarchism that gave birth to these ideas have been these more LEM trajectories. So I want to really drill down more into the evidence of what the bitterness has caused, what the harder focus has caused. And what I've seen, especially in philosophies like Molyneux's, is this idea of using purely logical and ideological ideas to denounce people, especially our family members, right? He had this concept of defoo, that we need to defoo everyone, especially how we dealt with our abuses and on ideological grounds. Let me be very clear, I'm not wholly against defooing. I think there are definitely times and places where that is an appropriate response to a horrendous situation. However, I do not believe it's something that we should actively advocate, because here's the thing, most families are already dysfunctional. If we went truly to the logical conclusion of defooing, we would all need to defoo our families because we're all born in abusive, shitty cultures, as Molyneux has even talked about himself. So I want to get away from that idea of attempting to practice and preach that, and instead trying to make corrections in the environments that we live in, trying to win our family over with our love, with our compassion, with the beauty of our soul. So that's one focus. And that's the thing. Molyneux has promoted these ideas which essentially tear people away from the idea of anarchism, or it alienates certain individuals and puts their defenses up where they go against the grain of anarchism. So that's what we want to do as compassionate anarchists, to balance it out. We want to come at this thing from a different angle, a more loving angle, or a stronger emotional approach to bring people together, to unify people. The other problem that has started to crop up recently, which I've noticed in my analysis in An Aesthetic for Freedom, is that these brutalist or anarcho-brutalism has cropped up. And it mainly was a response or a reaction to Jeffrey Tucker's article that he wrote, what was it, last year or 2 years ago, on anarcho-brutalism. And brutalism is just this idea that because these individuals have focused on the logic, economic, and moral factors of gaining freedom, that they can just be as douchey and as non-compassionate and as uncaring to other people as possible. So again, from the compassionate and relational standpoint, in order to balance that out, we have to dial down from the continuum, from the harder end of the continuum, down to the softer side. And the purpose of this is to be as authentic and genuine as possible insofar as loving other people, bringing other people into anarchism, and really letting them know that we're not all about just arbitrary hatred or just hair-trigger, edgelord manipulation tactics, or tactics that are meant to bring other people down for the sake of bringing other people down. That's not the case of what we're doing here with the compassionate trajectories at all. So in the relational community, in order to branch off and go the direction that we need to go, we need to do away, in my opinion, with brutalism. We need to treat each other, as I've talked about in other places, as decently as possible. We need to commend them for their courage, for wanting to argue against us, especially when we have raptor-like attacks of anarchists on status, since we do tend to really crowd together and really defend and help each other, which is very, very good, but we needed to change our approach, to augment or calibrate our approach to deal with status in a much more harmonious and loving fashion. The other problem I noticed in my critique of harder anarchism is that we're not very amenable to having more females involved in the anarchistic philosophy. And I cited a couple of pages, namely The Art of Not Being Governed, even my page on the Psychologic Anarchist, and various other larger pages tend to have a 25% female to 100% male ratio in regards to their followers. So libertarianism, anarchism, we're not attracting a lot of females to these ideas. And I think that is hinged on a single idea, and that idea is we're not compassionate enough, we're not loving enough, we're not trying to share experiences enough, we're not using narrative, we're not using dialogue near enough in order to bring these other more sensitive, more emotionally attuned people into our lives and into the fold of anarchism. So that's what we need to do in order to change that, I think, is start to look more at these relational and compassionate perspectives. That is the main thrust in regards to the critique. There's a lot more information that I want to go into. I specifically want to talk about nonviolent communication, which is the brain food that Marshall Rosenberg had to feed us in regards to treating other people with decency and dignity and meeting our needs. So we'll talk a little bit more about that next time. I want to go into even more detail about relationalism and a few of the different ideas in regards to relationalism. So I appreciate you guys checking out this video today. Kind of just made it off the spot. It was really fun to do. So you guys, please, if you haven't already subscribed, subscribe below. We'll talk more about relationalism. Maybe I'll do another Q&A pretty soon on the Facebook feed. And also, of course, www.psychologic-anarchist.com. This is Sterling. Have a great day. Thank you.